You're listening to the Ballet Piano Podcast, lifting the lid on dance accompaniment.
Hello, podcast fans. Welcome to the Ballet Piano Podcast in Conversation. I'm Matt Gregory, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Mr. Chris Hampson.
Hello, podcast listeners.
Now, our In Conversation guest today is a former English National Ballet soloist, internationally renowned award-winning choreographer, and the current CEO and artistic director of Scottish Ballet, Mr. Christopher Hampson. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Are you Chris or Christopher?
I'm a Chris. Otherwise, I think my mother's walked into the room.
Are you like me, Chris? You only get called Christopher when you're in trouble. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So how's everything going?
Oh, you know, about as good as it can be under the current circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. You're working on the Swan at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, we've just produced one short film and we've just wrapped on a really big feature film.
Okay.
So The Swan is the short film taken from David Dawson's Swan Lake.
Yeah.
And the feature film is to be released at Christmas instead of our Christmas season. But it's a big, epic 50-minute Christmas extravaganza.
Wow, that's really good. But you've been doing digital seasons since 2017. Is that right?
Right,
Scottish
yeah.
Ballet.
And
you were one of the first people to do it.
I think we were. I think we were one of the first in the world to produce a pure digital season. So the concept for that was just to make work that could only be accessed through digital platforms and conceived for digital platforms.
Yeah.
And we initially sort of worked with lots of different digital technologies with VR and AR and AI and, you know, all of those acronyms. It's really allowed us to pivot very quickly into this new normal of living our cultural and artistic lives online.
Yeah.
So I think lots of companies do this now, which is fantastic, and there's some fantastic content out there, and it's brought about a whole new breed of creative voices to the table as well. Although lots of companies are doing it, I feel like we went into this digital space currently with, I don't know, like with an added confidence. I think that we can inhabit this space quite confidently.
Yeah. And does that change the way that work is created because you know it's for film as opposed to on stage?
Yeah, it does. So to create work digitally, there's a different creative process, I would say, in that you need a buy-in from the dancers that's different. In that the creative process it's more insular in a way. It's about creating work that is not to be repeated. So when they do a take or when they are, capturing something, it really is forever. And that's quite a different, that's not just for the dancers, but that's also for the choreographers or composers or designers that we're working with. So there's a different weight that goes into it regarding that than a performance, which is an iteration of performances that hopefully improves and you learn over time. So it's quite a different approach.
Yeah. So where did choreography start for you? I presume it was at school.
Yeah, it was. It was at the Royal Ballet School. I didn't start choreographing till I was 16, 17 at the upper school. And I created something for the A-level dance, and the choreographic tutors at the time were a man called Norman Morris, former director of the Royal Ballet, and David Drew. And they were like good cop, bad cop in that order. Neither of them would, I'm sure, mind me saying that. They're sadly no longer with us.
Yeah.
And they saw that work, and Norman persuaded me to put it into the Ursula Morton competition, and it came third.
Yeah.
So it was great. And then I just kind of got the bug from there on in.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of something that you just have this natural instinct to create movement, isn't it? I suppose. Some people always know that they want to be choreographers and they just like to make movement.
I think for me it was more about telling stories than the movement. And in a way, I started telling stories, and then when I joined ENB, my director at the time, Derek Dean, sort of identified. He said the storytelling's strong, but where's the vocabulary?
Yeah.
And he was right in a way. I was kind of, I wasn't really generating new movements. So for a while, I went into sort of very abstract works like Perpetuum Mobile, Double Concerto, Country Garden, things that were just vocabulary builders, I think. And then I went back to, with all of that vocabulary, I went back to telling stories.
So did Derek sort of take you under his wing? Because he was the director and he's also choreographed himself.
Yeah, I think, Derek afforded me these opportunities with the company, but what I think he did smartly was he gave me the right scale of opportunities for the level at which I was, evolving.
Yeah.
So it started with fundraisers and small in-house works, but he commissioned these very small works. So I was precociously just bashing out solos and pas de deux, 10 to 15 a year, for the first few years. And then he gave me an opportunity on a small-scale tour, and then it was to piano, and then a small-scale tour to orchestra, and then a slightly bigger tour. And then, so he really built my opportunities along with where I was progressing choreographically. And it's something I try to do now when I work with choreographers. I try and match that.
I suppose that's really sort of a genius way to do it.
It's like learning your craft, I suppose, isn't it? As you're going along, sort of like if you compare it to a dancer, like rising up through the company, from core level right up to soloist or principal. It's similar sort of.
Absolutely.
Similar.
Yeah. It's identical. I mean, you're not going to give someone who's just in the company the leading role and just chuck them on stage and throw them to the critics and the audience. You nurture them. You develop their confidence and self-confidence.
It's like the stage wasn't too big for the work at that time, and then obviously as you got bigger and better, the stages and the pieces got bigger and better in length and things like that.
But funnily enough, in talking to you both, one thing I do recognise is that while the opportunities grew, and something like Double Concerto, I ended up with a cast of 38 and Poulenc's Double Piano Concerto in the orchestra pits. That was massive.
Yeah.
And, doing full-length productions shortly after that. And then I think as a creator, you go through a phase where you start to realise there's a naive confidence at that point. I recognise now, looking back 20 years, I go, there was so many things that could have gone horribly, horribly wrong. And in a way, I was less nervous then than I get now. Because with those years of experience, I've experienced pretty much all the things that can go wrong. Not all in one performance, but sometimes close.
And it's because
so that in a way, that naive confidence is really important place where you can be very bold, but then it kind of flips the other way as you get older.
I was just thinking then when I first started accompanying class, nearly 17 years ago, I was so overly confident. I had very little ability, but I was so overly confident going in there and going, I could do this. I had a clue what I was doing, but I was more than willing to give it a good go. I think
we've all done things where we've said yes, knowing that we really have no ability to really come up, and you just don't know till you try.
And as you go along in your career as a choreographer, the weight of expectation gets greater. So that's probably where the nerves come from, I suppose.
Yeah.
If you've been, fairly successful, we'll go through your awards in a moment. But if you've been award-winning and award nominated, then any new work that you make, there's probably a bit of expectation, do you find?
There is, yeah, absolutely. And none more so than at Christmas. And I keep doing this to myself. I keep doing Christmas ballets, and they're really hard because... I've had really successful ones and I've had really unsuccessful ones too. And I think what I've discerned over the years is that that weight of expectation that you're talking about that comes with a sort of legacy of work.
Yeah.
When you do a work at Christmas, it comes with the audience too, because you've got 2,000 people who want what they're watching to do something for them at Christmas. That's a really tall order. So,
Yeah.
2,000 people who, just have a weight of expectation about coming out feeling magical or inspired or something beautiful, or seeing a sort of subversing of a story, or, there's all of that, 2,000 opinions out there. But in a way, I quite like it.
I was going to say, not meaning to, put any more weight on your shoulders, but the whole of Scotland's Christmas expectations pretty much stop with you, don't they? If you get it wrong, that's it. Scotland can't have Christmas anymore.
Yes, that's why we've done our
pressure,
Christmas
Mr.
film. But in a funny way, I that is true, and it's why I'll often take on the Christmas commission, because it has to work for the company. It is that vital to our finances.
Yeah.
It needs to land. And what I did do as well when I joined Scottish Ballet was I could hear and sense how important Peter Darrell's Nutcracker was to people in Scotland. And I've obviously done a Nutcracker, and I've probably, have thought about different versions of Nutcracker. But when I heard that, I just thought, this needs to come back. People want this. They need to have it. It is this. We are Scotland's national company. And so reviving it was really important too. But again, the weight of expectation was incredible. And I worked with the designer Les Brotherston on bringing it back.
Oh, yes.
It was originally designed by Philip Prowse, who was his art tutor as well. So there was a nice connection there.
Yeah.
And Les said to me, look, what's the brief? Are we doing something brand new? Are we ripping it up and starting again? And I said, we are giving people what they think they remember.
Yeah.
Because when I looked at the old videos, we couldn't have put on stage what it was, because things have moved on. Scenery's better. We're used to a different experience in the theatre. You can't any longer sit and listen to the overture played twice in front of a curtain. It just doesn't. That's not the way people experience theatre now. And there's lots of opinions on that, but it's important to recognise it. And I felt in bringing back Darrell's Nutcracker that's what we were able to do.
Brilliant. And so, if we can go back a little bit to when you left ENB, was that 98, 99?
Yeah.
And obviously you'd done ballets for the company when you were a dancer. So this is you now going out and being a choreographer, full-time or freelance?
Yeah, freelance.
What was that transition like?
That goes back to naive confidence, because, I remember...
And did you know you wanted to leave the company? You were done with dancing.
I remember very distinctly being at the Royal Albert Hall doing Swan Lake and the Round, and putting on my makeup in the mirror, and I just got this horrible, horrible feeling because I wasn't excited. I didn't have those kind of good nerves.
Yeah.
I was really flat.
Yeah.
And I knew that when I walk into a studio to create something and work with the dancers, that's where my buzz was. And it's just really clear to me. I thought, right, we're done. We're all good. I've danced. Big tick.
Well, that's nice to be able to know what you're going to go on to do, because a lot of people don't, do they? You found something as a dancer that excited you, and quite often dancers can retire from the stage and spend years trying to work out what they want to do next, because dancing has been such a big part of their life, being on the stage.
Yeah, I feel lucky for that there was another drive within the profession that was taking me forward. And when I stopped, I did have a few commissions lined up, but not enough to sustain even a year, really. And I just did lots of directing galas with Wayne Sleep, lots of teaching at Pineapple, lots of freelance teaching and creating works for schools, for EMB School, Central, Royal Ballet School. Yeah. And again, it went back to that learning my craft, and actually the teaching... I love teaching. I really, really love it. And that was another form of income initially, but I grew to really love it.
And so let's talk about music for your ballets, for the new works and stuff. How do you go? Okay, let's talk about the creative process. Because I was watching the TEDx talk you did about the creative thinking and about having a completely blank canvas is the hardest commission. And so how would you go about making a ballet? If someone gives you a commission, what information do they give you?
So it can really vary, and I've had all sorts of questions asked around what, from directors, the commission is this, or do whatever you like. Or for me, I'm a very, very score-based choreographer.
Yeah.
So I played the piano, for years when I was younger.
And got your grade 8?
And barely.
We have a very good friend in common.
Yes. And I loved what I loved in my piano studies. I worked with Karen Greenhead, who was a teacher of Dalcroze Rhythmics, but she was my piano teacher. She only took on to me and Robert Cheesley, and so she used to, we played lots of piano duets together. Yeah. We worked through Bela Bartok's Mikrokosmos right through to Book 6. So I'm very, very score based. Yeah. And so what I tend to do is I listen to a very broad range of music, and then I'll just have one or two pieces that just sort of orbit me, and I'll listen to them an obsessive amount of times. I'll normally have the score, and I'll be reading through and making notes, thoughts. Often, I guess because of my Dalcroze, I often will draw a pattern. So I remember for double concerto, in the first movement, the last movement, there's a phrase that goes yum bump bump bump, and I just kept seeing these squares. So I kept drawing squares where that theme came, and actually the step that I choreographed is a square. So I find my way in that way, and that for me is my roadmap. Yeah. So that's for purely abstract work. For a dramatic work, it's still the score. If I can't hear a score, I'm not able to generate the vision in my head. So that's probably my, if someone took a score away from me, that would be my blank piece of paper. Yeah. In that sense.
And so when you obsess over the score, you start to create movement in your head, or sort of have a vision of what it might look like before you then go into the studio.
It's like you often hear people say this, but it is true. It's like a little film in my head. So I can sit and I'll listen to the music, and I can pretty much sometimes watch the whole ballet in my head, bits of it, solos, pas de deux, linking steps, groups. And what I'll do is the more I listen to the music and the more I visualize, I start to get a kind of pattern or plan of what it will look like. It's like I'm a mad map freak as well. Yeah. So I tend to talk in these terms. It's like I know what the kind of the high points, I know where the peaks are, and where the troughs are, and going into the studio is traversing the terrain. That's, how do you do it? What's it feel like? What's the weather like? What journey do you take people on?
And then how do you go about making the movement in the studio then? Do you sort of use the dancers to
it's changed over time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's changed over time, if I'm honest. When I started out, I think I had a very clear idea of what the steps were. Yeah. I would be quite prescriptive. And I would often, because I knew the dancers very well, they were often colleagues at EMB.
Yeah.
So I would try and either augment areas where they were really fantastic, challenge them perhaps in areas where I thought they could be better, precociously, because most of them were older than me. And I kind of sat in that style for quite a number of years, and then I think as I grew more confident, and importantly, so I grew away from dancers that I knew. So as I started to work in different countries, and I was working with dancers where I'd only just met them, I really had to invite them into the process. And now I'm at a point in my career where I'm working with dancers I know very well, but in a very different way as their boss. Yeah. And I'm in charge of their own professional progression. Yeah. In a way, I feel almost at my freest now. So I'm currently just restaging something of mine at the moment, and I'm just far more easygoing on letting them into the process. That's really changed over the years.
And do you have a preference for abstract or narrative ballets?
I think my natural inclination is narrative, but abstract's easier for me.
Because narrative, you've got
that really doesn't answer your question.
Well, no, because narrative, you're telling a story, so you've got to, decide what reads, don't you? I suppose. If you're, And
I find even in the abstract stuff, there's story there. It's never abstract, truly. So I'm going to say narrative is my answer. There
okay.
We go.
That's absolutely fine. Let's talk about the choreographers group that you've set up at Scottish Ballet.
Be delighted to.
Yeah, that's a way of you nurturing, choreographic talent within the company.
Yeah, I set up a group when I first got here, and it's actually really open to anybody who wants to explore creativity. So a bit like my beginnings, I didn't really think I was a choreographer. So I was just exploring making movement and telling stories. So it's open to anybody. And what I do is once the group's formed each year, I'll just sit down with them and we do the same thing every year. I set them a task and it's incredibly restrictive.
Right.
So you probably heard this in my TED talk, it's a 1 minute solo for a female and then the next, but they've only got 5 days to do it. Right. And then the next week. And I just kind of play around with, putting barriers in front of people so that they can exercise their creativity.
Yeah.
We have a lot of fun and it's a very supportive group. And it's different every year. There's a few that remain on it. But I'm thrilled because we've produced, Sophie Laplan, who's now our resident choreographer. She came from the first iteration.
Yeah.
And I recently commissioned Nick Shoesmith, who is a dancer still with the company, to do a work at the Edinburgh Festival this year. So, it's great because, confining in-house talent, which is wonderful.
And how many are in the group currently?
Currently, we're at 6 or 7, I think. Can't remember.
Okay. And did they get to showcase their solos that they've created? How does that work in terms of, getting their work out there?
Yeah, we just do a showing every week. So sometimes the kind of restrictive commissions are just 5 days. So time is often something I'm really keen for them to have as a restriction because in real life, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And so we just share internally within the company, sometimes to friends and at galas.
Yeah.
Can be either. But increasingly, and certainly with the pandemic on, I'm encouraging them to make films and to explore making work for their mobile phones, obviously any of their iPads, whatever they're using to film. And actually, they're a generation now that sit really easily making work for film, which is really exciting.
It's what everyone does, isn't it, on TikTok?
Yeah.
And it's all online now, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah.
You can follow the podcast team by visiting the social media channels. Search for Ballet Piano Podcast on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter for up-to-date information and content about the podcast.
Let's talk about your class teaching, because you also teach for the company, don't you?
Yeah.
How often in a week?
Oh, as often as I can. I say to my team to put me down twice a week.
Yeah.
It doesn't always end up like that with touring and me having to be elsewhere, but I try and do twice a week when we're back in a rehearsal period. And then on tour, I'll often do a couple of times a week as well. Here's my coffee. Thank you so much. It's very kind.
And do you enjoy it?
I'll set the door closed. I absolutely love teaching. I really do.
Yeah.
I feel so fortunate because I was cutting my teeth on teaching with some fantastic people around me. And yeah, I just feel really fortunate. And it's not that I had fantastic teachers around me. I worked really closely with Jonathan Still, who I'm sure you both know very, very well.
Yeah.
That relationship is has been and continues to be really important to me because Jonathan and I worked really closely when I started teaching. Obviously, he has a vast experience accompanying class, but it went beyond that. We have and do spend hours and hours talking about the relationship between a pianist and a teacher and what that delivers to a class. And honestly, I count that as going to university, my time with Jonathan. It really has been really vital.
We refer to him as the Godfather. Because
in a good way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He's the fountain of all knowledge. And I saw him just yesterday, actually. And he always speaks very highly of you. But the same for you.
We sort of did. We developed a class together, and what I like about our relationship is we developed a class together, and then we developed something else, and then we try something else. So we're never really sitting in one zone for too long. We're always trying to push it along.
Yeah. And
of course, with the company now as well, you have along with the conservatoire, the Musicians for Dance course.
It's a really great course, though. It as you can imagine, it really connects up, which is vital. The ability for an accompanist to aid rehearsals, classes, to be part of that leadership at the front of the studio, not just a. Oh, is that a dog?
We have a miniature Schnauzer in the room.
Oh.
Yeah. He's featured on many episodes of the podcast, actually.
Oh, what's his name?
In this way. Winston.
Hey, Winston. Hey, Winston. Nothing.
Oh, sorry about that.
Hey, Winston. I'm a dog lover. I've got 2 greyhounds.
Yes, we know.
I've seen your Instagram.
They get more hits than I do. Whenever I post a picture of the dogs, that my hit rate goes high up. But I just going to round off by saying I think the nice thing about the Masters of Music for Dance is it just cements that a teacher in class or a rehearsal director and the accompanist, they are a team and they are a leadership team. Yeah. It's not a service to the teacher. It really is just as important, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's how we like to look at it as well. You know, we're both ballet pianists. I always like to really support the teacher and the choreographer, you know, just support them.
And you'll know yourselves, sometimes that relationship you have, whether it's a teacher you know very well or even if it's someone new, often that discussion at the piano can be very personal, you know. The teacher could be going through something in their personal life they can't share with the room, but they just need someone to know. Or, you know, I'm sure you're I'm sure you get that, right?
Yeah.
Agony aunt in the corner sometimes, in a nice way.
Absolutely. And that, you know, once that trust is there, then, you know, you can go anywhere with it. And I think that the dancer in that class or rehearsal, they know when it's a good relationship because, boy, they know when it's bad, right?
Yes.
I've seen that one.
Absolutely.
And it's never fun for anybody, is it?
Oh, well, it's only fun for the bully teacher, probably, that's bullying everyone. Yeah. So probably fun for that person, but no one else.
So you became the director in 2002. How did that happen?
2012.
Oh, sorry. What did I say? I have 2012 written down. I promise you. Did I say 2002?
Yes.
I meant 2012. Believe me, I have it written.
I'm not that old.
I was going to say, when I've got 3 pages of notes for you, and you're so young for this amazing.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
When I look at
your 47.
When I look at your career and what you've done, I just think, wow, you are so young for having achieved so much.
I did get busy early. Yeah,
and also you did the choreographing and the dancing at the same time. So you can say your choreographic career started really early as well, which it did.
Yeah.
So,
I think, do you know though, I think the dancing and the choreography happened and then the teaching and the choreography happened.
Yeah.
And then all of it happened with the directorship. So they've kind of been building towards leadership. So
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Probably been helpful.
Yeah. So how did the appointment come about? I guess there was a job going.
Yeah, it was something. I was looking for a leadership role.
Yeah.
I was starting to see that I was going around the world creating ballets, but I was also noticing that artistic directors were leaning on me quite heavily for advice and thoughts and how they might do things differently, which was great to have that input. But I did think, well, what does that feel like, to have an impact on a company?
Yeah.
So I was actively looking for a leadership role, and Scottish Ballet came up. And it just felt like such a natural fit for all sorts of reasons. The size of the company is wonderful. I think it's the perfect size.
Yeah.
We're a size where we can be agile enough to take on the sort of bigger works, but also be very reactive, as you can tell, to what's happening around us. And to be of interest to newer voices as well, without that huge pressure of a sort of an opera house setting. So that attracted me. My mum's from Scotland, so that's been lovely. And I didn't tell them, my parents, that I was going for this job until I was sort of at the final interview stage. And I said I was up in Scotland having a final interview. And my mum said, "Oh, where is Scottish Ballet now?" It's Tramway and Albert Drive. And she said, "Oh, me and your dad used to live near there." And actually, they got married around the corner from Albert Drive.
Oh, wow.
So quite nice little
like going
connection.
home then.
It was a little bit. And it's just shown my holidays were spent coming to Gourock, which is where my mum's from, to visit my grandmother and grandfather there. So there is a very genuine Scottish connection in my family life. So that felt like a lovely fit too.
That's so lovely.
The writing was always on the wall then, pretty much, wasn't it? All roads led to this directorship, and it just happened to be in Scotland, which is the perfect place for you.
Genuinely, it did. And I'll tell you what was really progressive about the interview process was there was the usual kind of dry interview where you sit down with board members and chat. But what they did was they brought each of the candidates up for 2 days, and on one of the day you had the interview, but the other day was actually working with the company. So you could do anything. So I taught class and I taught a bit of rep. I taught a bit of 5 tangos. And then I met with every department. And so it felt like a process that was holistic and genuine. And I've since, as my leadership's developed, I realized that's why it was a fit, because, coming from a very touring background of EMB and before then, even as a child, I was touring with Northern Ballet. That's in my blood. So it felt like, very genuine fit and still does.
You were building your skills all along as a choreographer, as a teacher. You know what it's like on the road, and then you can bring all that to the directorship, can't you?
Yeah, and I think the teaching part is probably the bit that is the most important in a way. You might think the choreography is, because it's probably the more well-known side of what I do. But I didn't really rate myself as being any kind of teacher until I went to the USA. And I realised that I'd just been deeply, deeply British about my skill set. And I kept teaching as like some guilty secret that I earned pocket money with, It was while I was trying to be a choreographer. And it wasn't until I went to the USA, and where there you can choreograph, you can teach, you can be on a university course, you can be doing something else, you can be doing something in your community. They just celebrate people that do, and it's a really un-British thing. And so when I came back to the UK, I really came back sort of awakened to that and thought, no, I do teach, I enjoy it, it is part of who I am. So I think in a way that was quite a breakthrough for me in the way I thought about my career.
And as a director, it is quite unique of you to be a choreographer and a teacher. I know David does, doesn't he? David
Nixon does, yeah.
He teaches class, but not a lot of the directors do. Or maybe they do. Maybe I've got that way off.
No, I think it is quite unusual. And it's quite unusual for choreographers to teach at all, really. I can't think of many. Probably David, myself. There's a couple in the USA as well.
Yeah. So how do you go about programming the seasons? And do you know sort of how far in advance do you know what the company will do?
In any normal time, which we're not, but normally I know about 2 years ahead, with a third year sketched out. And currently it's about 2 months ahead.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. Yeah. And then presumably, I mean, what's the seasons like for the company? How often are you on tour? Are you performing? What does a year look like for Scottish Ballet?
Yeah, we're normally, obviously we've got a really important Christmas season, which normally runs December through to the beginning of February. We do about 65 performances, between 60 and 65 performances during that time. Our main touring centres are Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen and Inverness. And we'll visit those cities 3 times a year. Normally with 2 full-length productions and then 1 mixed programme. I normally do double bills because I just think triple bills, but they're dead. So
you heard it here first, listeners.
I've been saying it for years, but
I love that.
Yeah, so no, I've been saying it for a while now, but I just for touring companies, double bills, I think we just sell them so much more easily a double bill than a triple bill. So we tend to do 1 or 2 of those a year. And then we do what's called a Highlands and Islands tour, which goes right up to the Highlands and the Islands. No surprise there. So what we used to do was those kind of rumpty-tum out the back of a truck kind of diver evenings. But I've stopped doing that because I think, these people are still taxpayers. So I take as big a production as we can. So we've taken Matthew Bourne's Highland Fling, and we took a smaller version of my Hansel and Gretel as well. Yeah. And then we tour every other year to the USA and every other year to Sadler's Wells as well.
As you've gone, through your directorship, do you find your decisions have changed? Sort of, what works your programming? I mean, obviously, there's going to be new commissions in there and some classics, there's things like that inform your decisions.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest change has been a sense of getting braver with new commissions. I mean, obviously, I was always going to be making sure that there was new work for Scottish Ballet and broadening the repertoire. But what I've seen is that over time we've become quite a distinctive voice in terms of producing really new full-length works like The Crucible, like Streetcar Named Desire. And we've got some things in the pipeline that I can't talk about, but we've got 3 or 4 big works in the pipeline that are really exciting. I mean, even Myling, bringing Myling to the company in a really specific way. That I guess that bravery or confidence is coming through, not just from me, but for the entire team here. That's exciting.
And you have to think about the audience as well, in terms of what will sell and what they would want to see. And because presumably, if you only stay in Scotland, you probably know your audiences pretty well.
I have the audience in my thoughts. I don't think for them. So the reason I'm being a bit hesitant there is I guess there's a kind of sense now that our audiences in Scotland and actually in the USA and those that come to see us in London, there's this kind of trust now that if we're going to do something, there's a kind of Scottish Ballet way of doing something now.
Absolutely.
And it's really great that there's a trust there, because it means it frees us up to think more creatively, and then hopefully that trust builds. So there's a cognizance of our supporters. But what's wonderful is that our audiences are now, they're not just ticket buyers that come to see us in a theatre. They're people that engage with us through digital platforms and social media. They are our communities that we work with in our engagement projects because they're so linked to what we do.
Yeah.
But I think unusually for a ballet company, the engagement team, which is sometimes in some companies called education or outreach.
Yeah.
But the engagement team is under the artistic director position.
Yeah.
So I work really closely with our director of engagement, Catherine, to make sure that everything we put on stage can absolutely serve in every sense that we can think of our communities. So it's not just a bolt-on after the show's
That's
happened.
a really great approach.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Because I started off in the Learning and Access, I think it was called at the time, or one of the first gigs at Northern Ballet. And so like learning the company's repertoire that way. So it's really nice here that you said that, and going to the schools and going to different forms of homes and things like that. So it's really nice that you've got a whole full circle almost approach to the programming. That's really great.
I think as well it adds value to what we do. So you'll know, having worked in that area, that you get to know the repertoire in a really different way to the dancers or to the rehearsal directors. And actually sometimes they can shine a light back into what you're doing. And a good example of that is we were doing my Rite of Spring a few years ago. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it's sort of quite specific, and it's just two brothers. It's really tiny. It's just two men and a woman. And it's in a very sort of claustrophobic set. And it's really about the story of two brothers. Now, we brought in our Dance for Parkinson's classes, and this gentleman watched, nothing to do with ballet, he's just been coming to our classes. It really helps him in terms of movement and those pathways in his thinking about movement. And it was relayed back to me that he found it very compelling and very moving. And the reason was he could see at the end, the very last dance, where the younger brother's just dancing himself into a frenzy and being ignored by the other two characters. And he said it felt like how he sometimes feels in his head. And I just found that just incredibly moving and incredibly intense, to think that a story that was about one thing has resonated very deeply in someone in such a visceral way about living with a particular condition. So, that is a fantastic example of how it can shine a light back into what we're doing.
It's amazing.
And you're saying the education department works directly under you. Is that sort of part of your role as the CEO as well? How does that sort of bridge with the artistic directorship?
Yeah, so I get asked this question quite a lot around, and you're right, the ability to straddle a few different departments with that title of chief executive. But the question I get asked often is, what's it like doing two jobs?
Yeah, what's it like doing two jobs?
I don't do two jobs is my answer. I do one job. And I do one job. I lead the company. That's it. And I lead because I've got a really fantastic team that I work with who are able to support the vision, are able to propel the vision forward. So in a sense, making sure that every single department, whether it's philanthropy, whether it's engagement, finance, our technical team, that everyone is absolutely connected to what we do artistically without exception. That ability to bring everyone within one group rather than having the artistic department or group and then everyone serving it. It's just it just doesn't, I don't know, we work better bringing people in. It's a longer way round, and it sometimes means that we have to do things a bit differently. But I feel that with that sense of cohesiveness at the top between executive and artistic, there's a cohesiveness that runs through the company is my hope.
Yeah, and you're sort of keeping everybody on the same page, as it were, and sort of keeping that artistic vision.
Yeah, and it's reminding people that, we have in our dancers the most amazing group of artists, But we also have an amazing artistic team that support them, and an incredible performance medicine team that help to support them. And then, the philanthropy team come in behind to support the fact that they bring in money to produce productions that we can. It just reminding people of the connectivity of their roles within getting a work onto stage. So, for instance, with the film we just made, we just created this film called The Secret Theatre, and it was actually hugely proud of everyone, extremely proud of the dancers in front of the camera, but the Return to Work Committee, like that, just it's very dull title, but that committee were absolutely vital that we were able to do 3 weeks of intense filming under some really austere COVID protocols, because that committee had done their work and given us the guidelines in order for us to make the film. They got the biggest thank you from me, because without them, we'd have just been closed down probably. But we did it without any COVID cases, really safe working practices. And so, it's a reminder that we've all got a part to play.
It just sounds like everybody's valued. You know.
Well, they are.
It's probably a phrase that's used often, but it sounds like a really nice family to be a part of.
Yeah, I think it is a really great family. And like families, there's disagreements too, and there's challenges.
We all have a squabble every now and then, but that's part of, like you say, it's part of being a family, isn't it? It's part of it.
It is, and I think being a family in the artistic sense is about sharing values and sharing vision. It isn't about using each other to get somewhere. It's about all coming together to do something that's bigger than any of us individually, I guess.
It's a lovely vision. I like that. I very much agree with you. For what it's worth, that's beautiful.
If you're enjoying this episode, then why not visit the website balletpianopodcast.com and join the mailing list. You can access past episodes, transcripts, music playlists, and so much more. It will ensure you never miss new episodes or updates. That's balletpianopodcast.com.
Chris, thank you so much. But just before we finish, we've got a couple of little questions that we're asking everybody.
Yeah.
Tying all our interviews together. What is your absolute career highlight?
That is a really tough question. I bet everyone's saying that.
Yeah, everyone said that.
Oh, a career highlight.
Your absolute.
Oh no, that's horrible.
You can have a minute, and we'll edit the thinking time down.
I've got. Am I allowed to have?
Yeah.
Can I do 3?
Yeah. Okay.
In a leadership sense, it's my great privilege of leading Scottish Ballet. That is my career highlight. So let's say that as number 1. I think my choreographic one was probably, I've got loads, but I'm going to say Double Concerto at ENB when I premiered that, because it was kind of the culmination of a lot of work with the company. Yeah. But it was also a moving on point for me. So I guess that was a career highlight. And then my teaching career highlight is any class I teach with Jonathan.
Oh, that's going in the promo. What advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
The advice I give my 18-year-old self is to trust myself more than I did. So I remember when I was that age, I was listening obsessively to and reading a lot of Quentin Crisp stuff. And what I liked about him was he just said you should never worry about what other people think about you. And that was really in my headspace anyway. And I remember thinking, I shouldn't worry about that. but it's a difficult way to live. I'm better at it now, but I wish I'd got it a lot earlier. So I guess trusting myself would be the advice.
Super. If you weren't a ballet director, choreographer, teacher, what would you have been? A knitter. A knitter.
Or a marathon runner.
A marathon runner.
Oh, but both, yeah. Knitting and marathon running, they're my favourites.
Maybe you could do it at the same time.
That would be messy. I wouldn't like that garment at the end of 26 miles. Quite a few slip stitches in that one. What would I have been? I'm going to say I've never done this. I've said lots of different answers to this over the years, but I'm going to say explorer. Wow. I love traveling. I live to travel. I think it's an education, and I'm going to say explorer.
Yes.
But I've been knitting while I was exploring and running marathons.
Running marathons when you get there.
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
I had a cup of black coffee, as I always do, and a bowl of porridge. And a cuddle with my dogs.
Oh. We'll have to go to the socials to look at the dogs. And last one, if you won the lottery tomorrow, what is the first thing you're doing?
Paying for all the repairs on my house to be carried out. Because I live in a very beautiful Greek Thompson villa, but it's like the Forth Road Bridge. Once you fix one end, you just start again at the other. So that's what I would do. So that my dogs were all dry and warm the whole year.
Yeah. Oh. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I can't even tell you.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Chris, for giving us your time and just chatting
for
to us.
squeezing us in. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it too. You've made it painless. Thank you so much.
Yay.